Well done. Council, when indicating that they want to speak on an agenda item, please can you use the blue hand facility on Zoom? Father Oliver Cross will now lead us in prayer.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Today is All Souls Day, when many Christians throughout the world remember their dear departed loved ones and pray for all those who died. And it's been a particularly difficult season for all of those who have gone through a bereavement because of the pandemic and not being able to be at their loved ones' bedsides when they've been close to death, only having very limited funeral ways in which we've had to adapt to the situation around us. As much as praying for your counsel and for your deliberations this evening, perhaps we can keep just a moment or two of quiet as we remember all our departed loved ones, those whom we have commended, and all those who we miss very much, especially as the nights draw on and as we face a new lockdown.
Amen.
Hear us, merciful Father, as we remember in love those we have placed in your hands, those whom we see no longer, those who have been part of our lives, those who have inspired and directed us, even those we have found difficult, those who are past members of this corporation or who have been part of this town. Acknowledge, we pray, the sheep of your own fold, lambs of your own flock, sinners of your own redeeming. Enfold them in the arms of your mercy and in the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and in the glorious company of the saints in light. Amen.
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 Thank you, Oliver. Any declaration of interest from members? I'll take that as a no. Councillors, may I approve the minutes of the meeting of Council 28th of September?
Agreed.
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 I assume that's agreed then. We've got a fair few apologies tonight, unfortunately. Absences received from Councillor Meredith, who I believe is in hospital. Councillor Hadland, McCutcheon and Chunga. And I had a late one in, Councillor King. Anybody else?
Nobody's indicating.
No, right, Mayor's announcements. First of all, thank you to all my fellow members for their generous contributions to my charity, The Lowdown. Nearly £6,000 was raised from your COVID impairment funds, and I know they are extremely grateful as I am. It's been incredibly tough to fundraise in this climate, so it's really, really appreciated. Besides the dreaded old risk assessment and a restricted engagement schedule, I have managed to safely visit some of our community. Councillor Hill kindly invited me to Brampton Primary School. We had a really lovely day, meeting the pupils who were absolute characters and were all lovable. The Mayoress and I attended a virtual fundraising for Go Gold for Alfie Bear. Not the usual dinner, but it was much fun and they managed to raise £1,000. Councillor Stone kindly invited me to Northampton Town of Sanctuary Conference. This was incredibly eye-opening, and I want to take this moment to congratulate them on all the hard work they have been helping the most vulnerable at this time, especially the youngsters. I was honoured to judge posters by school children to support the work from the community engagement team and raise awareness for hate crime in schools. Going forward next week, we have Diwali on Saturday, one of the main events in my eyes of the town. The Mayor's office and the comms team will send you details of how to watch live. I'm sure they'll watch it. And of course, the coming Sunday is the 8th of Remembrance Day. This year will be a first in history as a virtual affair, unfortunately. We honour the event as best we can. I urge you to join us all online. We should have details from the Mayor's office. Please keep an eye on your emails, as due to new regulations, some aspects will be changing. Please contact Lizzie in the Mayor's office if you have any contributions for any online event or any questions. Send in your online events. You've got to give me something to do. I can't sleep all the time. Public comments and petitions. 6 members of the public registered to speak before the deadline. I will call Robin Burgess, Anne Minikiri, and Rachel McGrath to speak on motion 1 at that point in the meeting. I will also call on Alice Whitehead, Joe Cole, and Russell Horsey to speak on motion 2 at the appropriate time. Members of the public question time. 10 questions have been received and are presented on screen. The answers have been taken as tabled unless a supplementary question is asked. Please note you have 30 minutes for this item. Keep your comments short and to the point. I will also confirm that the public or councillor who submitted the question can ask 1 supplementary. Question 1 from Councillor Duffy to Councillor Hallam. Councillor Duffy.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hi.
I'd like to add a supplementary, if I can, to that.
All right.
Okay. Can I say how important neighbourhood wardens are in encouraging communities to abide by regulations such as litter picking, I find it very difficult to understand the Kingdom enforcement contract when the neighbourhood warden usually works on their own and not with other people on the streets. Thank you.
Okay. Any reply, Councillor Hallam?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, they don't work with them, but it was a creative way of funding an additional warden within the budget. And obviously, as their service isn't currently operational due to COVID restrictions, that's not brought in the necessary money that we had hoped. And the other thing to mention is, of course, we still have a record number of wardens and rangers in the team. So the one that we had hoped to add in the budget would only have increase the number even further. So unfortunately, the situation with COVID is what it is, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Duffy again to Councillor Hallam. Did that cover it?
Yes, it did cover it. And Mr. Mayor, reply as written is accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Ashraf to Councillor King. Is any other councillor taking this as Councillor King is not in attendance?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to take it.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm actually happy. I am happy with the response. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashraf. Question from Councillor Ashraf to Councillor Hallam.
No, I'm happy with that response too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Question from Councillor Ashraf to Councillor Hamel. This is question 5.
Okay. I'm happy with the response as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions from Councillor Stone to Councillor King. Who's answering this?
I don't have a supplementary, thank you, Mayor.
You're quite happy with it. Question for Councillor Russell to Councillor King, who is not in attendance again.
Yes, I'm happy with the reply. I would have liked some reassurance that the council, while continuing to support fully the democratic services or process, would have a programme set down to reassure our electorate. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 8, question from Councillor Birch to Councillor King. Councillor King was quite in demand tonight. Unfortunately, she's not well.
Thank you. No supplementary.
Thank you. Question for Councillor Roberts to Councillor Larratt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a small supplementary. On the funding of an independent highways inspector, could we have some clarity on where that's coming from?
I believe, Mr. Mayor, it's coming through the Highways Highways Authority, the County Council. I'll double check that that's the case, and if it's any different, I'll let the member know.
Thank you, Councillor Larratt.
Thank you.
Question from Councillor Roberts to Councillor Larratt.
As far as the response is concerned, I'm not sure it gives us a timeline of events and a query against what I've said there, which is that this issue is going to be kicked into the long grass of unitary. I think it kind of suggests that that's going to be the case. Perhaps we could have a clearer update into scrutiny.
Are you going to reply to that, Phil?
Mr. Mayor, it's a question for Councillor Hibbert, not me.
Righto. Sorry.
Hang on.
Have you read it through, Councillor Hibbert?
I'm here. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Mayor.
It's got Roberts on my list, so
I got a message. I got a message that said the host had removed me from the meeting, so I had to log on again. I had to come back in again. So I'm sorry. I've missed out on the last few questions, but if Emma has got a supplementary, I'll try and deal with it.
I don't. Have you, Councillor Roberts?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Hibbert, what I was saying while you were not allowed on the meeting was that I appreciate the update you've given, but I do think that suggests it will be being kicked into the long grass. So I just wondered if we could have an update perhaps into scrutiny on the point.
I think in answer to that we will be updating you in future meetings as this goes forward. I think I've explained what we're doing, and I do need to collate the information from MPH, who, as I said, have never raised this as a serious issue with us before. And we're also taking the opportunity to review the tenancy agreement in total rather than just relating to the tree issue, which I think is a good idea. I'm not kicking it into the long grass, but COVID and the unitary elections, they're in the way anyway. There's nothing I can do about that. But we'll get on with it, and I will report back at future meetings as to any development.
Thanks, Councillor Hibbert. Cabinet member presentations. Call on cabinet members in turn to give a brief overview of their respective portfolios. This will be limited to 3 minutes each. A period of up to 45 minutes have been set aside for this item, and I would encourage members to bear that in mind. I call on Councillor Nunn.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I start off by talking about COVID in my report here as one of the key things. Of course, significant changes in the last few days, and what a rotten business this virus is. It's stolen from us so much the right to go about our ordinary lives. It's been very difficult balancing the priorities of health, economy and just the liberty of people living their lives freely. And I guess now what's happened with the government decision has almost taken that away from being a local decision. Thank you to everybody in Northampton who has worked so incredibly hard to follow precautions, wear face coverings, etc. And I know that they have. The vast majority of people have, yet regrettably it's not been enough. And in the last week or so, over 1,000 more people have contracted this virus in the county and 385 within our town, although that was last Friday's figures and it's crept on again since. So sadly, we are where we are. And it turns us to think about a whole variety of different things. What will this mean for Christmas and yet more celebrations that can't happen, which make our town, part of what makes the life of the town so great, but also actually to the economic recovery. So I'll skip to economic growth. We know that the economy is in many areas in serious trouble now. And, if we want good services, they have to be funded. And so the economy is not just about profit or anything else. It's about people's jobs, people's rents, people's mortgages, people feeding their families and so on. And so that gives me serious concern for what the future will be. We do know there is some information on grants. Now, the headlines are there. The government has said what grants they may be, they intend to provide. But behind that sits an awful lot more detail. And we need to be certain what they're asking us to do in order to know that we will get that money back from them. And we're urgently pursuing that with them now. We have a good process in place. We've dusted it off and oiled it back up. So as soon as we have the firm information, we'll be making finances available to those companies through the grant scheme that we're hearing about. Moving on to other sort of issues. Obviously, a lot is now happening with Future Northants, and it's fair to say that with 6 months suddenly coming on the horizon, I think that's been quite a wake up even to those of us who've known the day by day sort of time ticking by on the clock for that anyway. And I see that in members, I see that in staff, and I see that in all of us. So I recently appeared at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the West Shadow to talk to them about how we need to communicate a certain degree of confidence, no more than confidence. Residents need to know that this council will be there for them, this new council, and it'll be responsive, and staff will need to know that there's a certain future in it for them. So we're working on that in terms of communication. Apart from that, I mentioned some of the events and things that we have or have not been able to do, particularly in Councillor King's absence, though, if I may just be indulged to add something. We have Remembrance coming up. We would normally be celebrating this coming weekend, marking it, I should say, not celebrating. And isn't this just one of the most important events in the calendar? And actually, I think over recent years, we've seen an increase in the number of people who've come in to see it. I think we have one single simple message, and it's with a sad heart that we have to say it. We are asking people not to come into town on Remembrance Sunday. This is a rotten thing to have to do for something that is so very, very important, not just to all of us as part of the community, but particularly to those who have been involved in the military in conflict or have lost loved ones. We are asking them, please, to remember from home. We have a meeting tomorrow morning, which I know Father Costa's involved in, and there'll be some discussion there, but I think we are at this point concluding that a church service even will probably be unlikely. Certainly for sure, we're asking people not to come in. Please remember from home. There will be wreath laying and various things online. If we could ask you to do that, that'd be much appreciated. That's probably it from me, Mr. Mayor. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Two councillors are indicating to speak, Councillor Danielle Stone and Councillor Zoe Smith.
Councillor Stone.
Lovely, thank you very much. I've got a couple of observations to make, Jonathan, if you don't mind, and then I've got a couple of questions. One is, when you kindly report to us that you have been, for example, in a member briefing session on the government's white paper, or you've been to SEMLEP, it would be really good to know what came out of those meetings rather than just knowing that you've represented us there. So if that's okay for you, that's just an observation. On paragraph 1 in your report about COVID, how serious is this? This is absolutely terrible. And we know from previous experience of the lockdown that we're very, very dependent on the goodwill of people helping us to put this lockdown in place and keep everybody safe. And people in the town stepped up to that, didn't they, and did a fantastic job. And all the volunteers that came into play to help look after people was absolutely fantastic. But there's also need for enforcement. And so the worry is that we're putting too huge a burden on licensing and the wardens and our other agents who are having to double up in their tasks. And maybe we ought to be looking to see how we can increase the capacity of their team so that they can do both their jobs properly instead of doing both under too much stress. So I'd like to make that observation. The other observation I'd like to make is in relation to decision making, and particularly the decision making at the county. Say, for example, around the scooters. There must be lessons to be learned, and indeed closer to home for me around the Billing Road, kerfuffle, if everybody remembers that. So the county made a decision, it was overturned because 1,000 a resident signature petition was presented to them. This is not the way to make decisions. And if that is going to be the pattern with the West Northampton Authority, I'm going to be very, very cross. So I would appreciate it, Leader, if you could say something about that and say how we're going to work with the county and the West Northampton Authority to make sure that proper decision making is made with consultation with all the key partners, so that the decisions made are good and can be implemented, if that's okay with you. And then the last question is related to that. My group, and I'm sure a lot of residents, are still full of anxiety about how we're going to best promote the interests of Northampton within the wider authority. We're having to make a success of this authority. We all want that, but we don't want that success to be at the expense of Northampton. So we all want to be going forward together with all the due protections in place. So thank you for that.
Councillor Smith?
Should I just respond, Mr. Mayor, and then
if you wish to reply, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Stone. Yeah, happy to talk about any of these things. It's a fair point on the start of the report. I think you're absolutely right, incidentally, on your first point. Secondly, in terms of the effort, yeah, absolutely, and wants to echo what you've said about how well everybody has stepped up, be they volunteers, the general public, but certainly there are some staff of ours working incredibly hard for sure. And you highlight environmental health, for example, who always seem to me to be working day and night the nighttime economy. Of course, now we'll have a month without that, and as a result of that, that will slightly change, but the burden on them is very, very significant. I do keep up a dialogue with them. I spoke to Ruth Austin today on a query and had a chance for a general discussion about that. And of course, there are skills and expertise required when we have issued enforcement penalties, and I agree with you, by the way, in the importance of enforcement. But they are challenged. When people get these, they come back and they ask for the level of training and education and so on of our people. They argue against them. They tell them that it wasn't right. They tell us they're being victimised. So these are not necessarily the easiest and the quickest people, and probably, I would guess, in demand at the moment. But I would share your view. Myself and the Chief Executive are constantly trying to check that we have the right capacity in place. But I think it's quite difficult to turn the tap on suddenly. I think, reassure you that on balance, people are in good spirits and are coping. I have to say that the fact that we are still in this, we wouldn't have imagined 6 months, would we? Now we're looking down the barrel of the thick end of probably 10 or 12 months. So we need to keep that under constant review. Perhaps my concluding remark on that would be, I promise you we are keeping it under constant review so that we both look after the welfare of the staff, but also ensure that we are diligently carrying out the guidance and the enforcement. I'm quite pleased to say that enforcement is, compared to other areas, our enforcement is strong in Northampton. I heard some statistics a little while ago, but I can't remember clearly enough to quote, but across the whole of the East Midlands, there had been more enforcement that happened within Northamptonshire, I think it was a county statistic, than the whole of the rest of the East Midlands. And I don't mind that. Guidance always comes first, but nevertheless, we have to tell people that if they come into town, in the same way as if they eat in a restaurant, they shouldn't get food poisoning because we inspect it. They shouldn't get COVID by going into an establishment because we are ensuring and enforcing to make sure that the standards are high. Obviously, a lot of that has changed now with the nighttime economy being taken away. The next point was generally around decision making. I would like to think we do that reasonably well. We take time over our council meetings, our cabinet meetings now, and so on. I hope that we have a decent model in Northampton, which the bits of that you and I might agree on. I think we go together in making sure that that's the shape of the new unitary, and it's the way I would like it to be. I'll reference quickly some of the things you've mentioned: scooters, Billing Road, and so on. Yeah, in hindsight, that like all of these active travel for which the County Council have received the opportunity of money, they've all moved so very, very quickly, and more could have been done in advance to get ready for that. However, we have now seen quite a positive spirit of cooperation. You will now start to see registration numbers appear boldly on the side of the scooters, which mean if you see one on the pavement, you can scribble down a 5-letter number and you can report it. I have had complaints with that number. I've passed them on, and I know that the County Council have issued warning letters to people, and those come with a warning that there's something like a 2 strikes or a 3 strikes and you're out. So if you get a series of those, you are blocked as a user on the scooter. So we have seen significant changes made there, but that's been as a result of some cooperation. I think the same thing, I'm not here necessary to answer for the county, but the Billing Road, urgent need to get a bunch of schemes identified. And actually, I don't think the Billing Road was a starter from the beginning, with the hospital, the ambulance service and so on. And I think now we've opened up a more positive dialogue and fed a lot of comments in. We've made both informal and formal responses to consultations on things like the active travel proposal, and indeed on the electric chargers, which have got to be a good thing to see more of those in our town, and they support our climate emergency commitment and so on. But they need to be carefully placed so that they minimise the disruption on residents. There are some situations where they were due to be outside nurseries, which was felt to be unsuitable and so on. So that active dialogue is going on, to the point where there is one more new initiative coming along, which you may not be aware of, which is something that would be the second town in the country to trial, which is a delivery robots. The county have come to us and asked us to try and tear the thing apart. We've done our best and actually have not found any gaps in it. So we would like to think hopefully that will be launched soon. But that's a difference in working practice, where we've had the chance to look at it, really work out whether it's going to work or not. And I think for our small independent traders, that particular scheme is going to be a very valuable one, but I won't steal any more of the thunder. My hope, therefore, is that in West Northants, we will see positive collaboration. I didn't reference it, but both you and I, Councillor Stone, have been working on the Vision and Culture working group. My view on the unitary is quite simple. I think we have some wonderful people in place in all of the different aspects, the county type services, adult social care and so on, and indeed throughout the districts on the services that we do. I think there is some fantastic technical expertise. The real success of that will be down to the culture, which will be people who feel engaged, who want to be at work, to support residents as the best they can. So I think that culture is incredibly important, and for our part in the democracy, it's absolutely vital, the way in which decisions are taken and are seen to be fair, and people have the opportunity to
Time, Councillor Nunn.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith?
Thank
Any
you,
questions?
Mayor.
Pleasure.
Based on your report, again, just thinking along the lines of green travel and effective travel, I think it is really important to have that sense of balancing the car user, but it's also really important to make it as easy as possible for people to choose not to be car users if they're able to make that choice. So that's in terms of all the different types of transport. And I think it's also really important to think in terms of equalities in green transport. So there are many people for whom the new solutions of green transport, such as cycling and scooters, are not feasible and practical alternatives, whether that's because of their financial circumstances or whether that's because of their abilities and things like that. So public transport, which has really been sort of put to one side during the pandemic because it's not a very safe way to travel, is also the only way to travel for many people. And I just think it's really important to bear that in mind and to think about how the green economy can work for everybody.
Jonathan?
Happy to take that on board. I wouldn't disagree. And if Councillor Smith is happy rather than a specific answer, I'll just say, look, I agree and noted. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Larratt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to present my report, and in doing so, can I firstly thank Tracy Tiff for the work that she continues to do with the Centre for Public Scrutiny in waving the flag for Northampton Borough Council. It's great to have somebody operating at this level, promoting the work that we do and demonstrating us as an exemplar. So thank you again to Tracy on that one. I'd like also to thank the Legal Services Litigation team. As you full well know, Mr. Mayor, we had a very difficult traveller encampment established down on Banbury Lane, which was very, very difficult to handle because of the land ownership issues. And I have to say that our team worked extremely hard in order to get this resolved. with court appearances and all sorts. It was a very difficult issue, but they worked well and we got there in the end. On electoral services, can I reassure members that our staff are working hard to prepare for the elections in May? And can I just reiterate, for sake of clarity, that Paul Rousell, the MHCLG senior civil servant who's overseeing the transition to unitary and everything, made it very, very clear at the meeting of the Joint Implementation Executive on the 14th of October that these elections will go ahead. Government and civil servants are all clear that these elections will happen and will go ahead. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it's coming from the top, and there is a very strong will to make sure that this happens, and I'm pretty sure it will. But from the perspective of Northampton Borough Council, we've got our team in place and they are preparing for those elections as we speak. So other than that, Mr. Mayor, I've nothing to add. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor.
There are 3 councillors indicating to speak: Councillor Jane Birch, Councillor Sally Beardsworth and Councillor Gareth Eales.
Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Larratt, you've just mentioned Democratic Services and the great work that they do there. Do we have sufficient capacity within that area? Several officers are working across Northampton Borough Council and the West Northampton Shadow Authority. For instance, our council paper was very late this meeting, and other papers have been, only just been delivered in time. And are our officers actually too stretched at the moment? On another matter, with the list of assets, when are we going to have a list of these assets that will be transferred to the parishes and the town councils? And what's the timescale and the cost of this, please? And you've also just mentioned the electoral services. So in the light of the pandemic and the social distancing, which could last until May 2021, are the election team asking residents if they would like to register for postal votes? And again, in your report, you've mentioned the rail issues, a major part of your report. And I've asked before if we could have a briefing on this. It's a very complicated issue. And I was wondering if that was in the offing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as resource and capacity is concerned, I understand the councillor's concern, but I do have regular meetings with the head of legal services, and I can assure you, and I'm sure he will confirm, that that's one of the key items on the agenda that we talk about at least on a monthly basis. So I am, there has been resource obtained in legal services to deal with demands there, but I haven't had anything raised with me with regard to democratic services, but I'll make sure it's on the agenda for my next meeting with the head of legal services. With regard to assets, there are some assets that we'll be talking about later on this evening, but as you know, the working group still has a lot of work to do with regard to the transfers, and those items will be coming forward to the working group in due course. Electoral services, postal vote, people are always entitled at any time to apply for a postal vote. When the registration forms go out and things, there's a question on there that asks people if they want to apply for a postal vote, and anybody applying will be applications will be dealt with appropriately. So if anybody wants to apply, please do. It's not something that the government want to see as a complete or any other opposition party, according to Paul Rousell, nobody is looking for a complete postal vote election in May. That came very clear from Paul Rousell. But as I say, anybody wanting a postal vote can and apply for one, and we will deal with it. With regard to a rail briefing, yes, it's something I've been meaning to raise with Paul Everard, and I'll make sure that we get something in the diary. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bearsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of points for Councillor Larratt. I think it's very, very important that we make the virtual council know how important the traveller unit is at resolving a lot of these issues with travellers. The local knowledge they possess is paramount to make sure that we don't have any problems with travellers in the future. And I feel sure that myself and him will fight to keep that going. Secondly, the business of Paul Rousell, knowing that I don't know where Paul Rousell lives, but does he live in Northampton? Is he a resident here? I haven't been asked whether I think postal votes would be suitable. I think a lot of people would like them, and I think something ought to go out with the postal forms to say to people, if you're not happy about going to the post stations, you can actually have a postal vote, and this is how you do it. Because there's a lot of people who are very, very frightened of catching COVID and wouldn't be very happy about going to a polling station. So I think something we should be looking at to assist the public in allowing them to vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sally and I think we're both on the same page with regard to the CTU. It's been in existence a long time, has a great deal of expertise in dealing with traveller issues, and it's already been agreed that the CTU will continue on a county-wide basis post unitary. I can't remember if it's West Northamptonshire or North Northamptonshire that will be the lead authority on that, but one of them at least, and the CTU will continue. It's imperative that it does, and that we don't use the knowledge and expertise that's there. With regard to Paul Rousell, he's a senior civil servant based in Whitehall. I have no idea whatsoever where he lives, but he is working with government and cross-party with government. Any requirement to make it an all postal vote election would require legislation. And Paul Rousell's made it very clear that from his discussions with government and others parties, that there's no desire for that legislation to come forward at the moment. I mean, things have changed since he said that on the 14th of October. So you never know, things may change. But we can, as I say, anybody requesting a postal vote will be, their application will be processed, and they will be provided with one if they so wish. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gareth Eels.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak, but just to come back on Paul Rousell, this super civil servant, and the willingness and desire from the top, to quote, that the election goes ahead next May. This is the same top, this is the same government that only a few days ago wasn't sanctioning a second lockdown. Now, look, I think we've got to face it to the reality of where we are. You know, if this is a public safety issue, I don't want a delay to any more elections. There's been a democratic deficit around here for too long. However, if this is a public safety issue, I don't think we can afford to be sort of blasé and foolhardy about it. I think we've had enough of that as it is. So would the Deputy Leader agree with me that there is at least the real potential for a delay? Forget bluff and bluster of what the government wants in terms of reality and where we are now, where we're potentially going to be going into next year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, I mean, as I just said in my answer to Sally, where Paul Rousell made it very clear, I think it was on the 14th of October, that there was no desire for an all-out postal vote election. Since then, things have changed. We're now faced with a second lockdown, etc. The views have changed. Who can predict? I just think we're in a very difficult situation. It is a moving, things are moving and changing all the time, and this could well change. And I do think, and I do agree to some extent that things may well change. I don't want a delay to the elections. I think Councillor Eales is absolutely right. The democratic deficit has gone far enough, and we can't go another year or however long without elections. We must have these elections, as simple as that. So whether that changes and there is legislations to make it all postal vote election, I don't know. But as we all know, Councillor Eales is quite right. We were all told there wouldn't be a second lockdown, and there is a second lockdown. So, we're being told that there won't be a postal vote, all-out postal vote election. Who knows? Perhaps there will be. It's all such a movable feast, Gareth, and your crystal ball's as good as mine, mate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hallam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one point to add to my report, so I'll be very brief. Just to touch on what's been said earlier, really, by the leader, but I've been amazed at just how hard some of the people within my team have been working on kind of what is our front line on COVID. So that's environmental health, that's the wardens, that's the rangers. And I wrote this report before, obviously, the announcement on Saturday. So it was really all referring to their work around the rule of six and around enforcement and legislation on businesses and hospitality. Been working phenomenally hard, and we owe them all a debt of gratitude. And what I would encourage other councillors to do, if they do happen to speak to one of the team or one of the guys in the team, just say thanks for your efforts. Start the call by saying thank you, because it absolutely costs nothing, and they've been working fantastically hard. So big well done to them. I'm sure they'll keep it up over the next few weeks. Happy to take any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, we have 5 councillors indicating to speak. Councillor Ashraf, Councillor Roberts, Councillor Birch, Councillor Marriott, and Councillor Russell.
Councillor Ashraf.
Yes, thank you. To Councillor Hallam, can you please express our thanks to the team? I know they've been working really hard and they are quick to respond to any inquiries that I have made, so please relay our thanks. I have 3 very quick questions. I want to find out how many businesses ignored COVID guidelines in the town. It would be helpful if we can obtain some stats at the full council meeting about missed bins and other issues that crop up. The stats are really helpful to give us a guide as to how the town is doing. And my third question is, based on your report under parks and open spaces, where you mention an additional 50,000 capital has been made available to improve the play area. How do you select the parks when you obtain funds to improve them? So how do you make that decision? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll go in reverse order. Selection of parks is really done on a rolling basis as to what's getting older and what needs attention. If you remember, it was only a couple of years ago that there was no money in the budget whatsoever for parks and open spaces for stuff being replaced. And under the old contract, if a swing was broken, we were left with an empty frame, which when I took over this portfolio, I thought was absolutely madness. So we've come an awful long way in that time, where we've now got a rolling program of replacements and refreshes. So I think it's that's been really good. Stats on missed bins are available. They don't come to full council. They come to Councillor Larratt's monitoring report, which goes to cabinet on a regular basis. So that's where to find those. And in terms of businesses ignoring the guidelines, I don't have the statistics to hand. Actually, the compliance has been really good. On the whole, there have been a few isolated examples which have then got into the press where enforcement has been undertaken. So we'll share some statistics with you separately so we don't get them wrong.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of points. Firstly, we all will express thanks to our wardens. I spoke to my neighbourhood warden today, and she's working, as always, incredibly hard. I think the question we have to ask ourselves, though, is, are they working harder than they should be? Are they stretched and doing two different jobs? I think that's a really important point, Councillor Hallam. Yes, we know they're working hard. Yes, we express huge gratitude to that, but we shouldn't be forcing them to double up their duties. On a separate point, we can see a significant amount of revenue that's been produced from the garden waste scheme. I just wondered if we could have some details on how that was being spent or reinvested. And finally, we were getting somewhere from you providing fly tipping figures and details of timescales for removal. We seem to have lost that. I wonder if we could get that back again, because we have seen, or it feels like we've seen a significant increase again on that.
Yes, again, on fly tipping figures, they actually do appear in, once again, in that monitoring report. I was making a habit of putting them into the portfolio holders report as well, just because it was always an area of interest. So happy to bring that back. In terms of garden waste subscriptions, it's gone into the budget. So that would be a question for Councillor Eldred. And then your first point, if you remind me what that was. On wardens. It was on the wardens. Yeah. On wardens. Are they doing two jobs? Well, effectively, unfortunately, they are at the moment, and it's a question of needs must. And if you think back a few weeks ago, sort of towards the end of the summer, when our rate was going up of COVID, we were coming under question that we might end up in a kind of a local lockdown. Well, actually, the work that the wardens did at that time was absolutely phenomenal, and nobody shouted about it for obvious reasons. But the work that happened, along with other partners as well, did bring that rate down. So there was a clear correlation between the work that was undertaken and what was done. So unfortunately, it's needs must at the moment. So I'm sure they'll carry on doing the excellent work that they are.
Thank you. Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hallam, we really do appreciate the work that the wardens do. And again, we're coming down to sort of maybe a question of capacity here, but local residents in lockdown have found time to empty the attic, clear the garage. The amount of fly tipping that has been generated by people's extra time at home has been incredible. Is there enough time, people on the ground, trucks to pick up some of this fly tipping, because people are also noticing it far more. Their neighbours are noticing all the small things around them that perhaps they haven't had time to notice. And one of the things they do actually complain about non-stop is other people's rubbish.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think we do notice it a little bit more when we're spending more time at home. I don't necessarily think there's a direct correlation between people clearing out the attic and doing those household chores in lockdown, and that being an increase in fly tipping. And actually, the evidence doesn't point to that. The evidence points to those people actually going to the tip and disposing of their waste correctly. Where there is a direct link, and there's lots in the media on this, if you do a Google when you get 5 minutes, is the relationship between criminal gangs and organised fly tipping and how that's growing. And that's an incredibly tough problem to solve when you've got other problems to deal with as well. So we'll keep doing absolutely everything we can.
Thank you. Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just welcome that Miller's Meadow has been included in the £50,000 refurbishment, Councillor Hallam. I really appreciate that. I'm sure you're aware that I, on behalf of the Semelong Trinity Neighbourhood Forum, has been pursuing the issue about the really tired and worn down equipment there. So my question to you is, could you actually keep me updated on exactly what work is going to be carried out, when it's going to be carried out, so I can feed that back in to the residents who are really concerned about the area? And it would be good as well if you can keep Councillor Birch informed, because she's the secretary of that forum, please. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor Marriott, more than happy to, and that will be part of the process as well. I think you coined the phrase really, which is why we're targeting some of these areas, which I think you describe it as tired and worn, and they're the ones that now we're now targeting. We've done a lot of the ones that so adding bits of equipment and things like that. So those tired and worn ones we really want to give a refresh to. So I really hope that will help down in Millers Meadow.
Thank you. I've got another councillor. There's 5. I've only got 4. Tracy, do you know who the other councillor was?
Yes, Councillor Beards. We've got Councillor Russell and also Councillor Beardsworth is now indicating as well.
So that's 6, right. Councillor Russell, please, next.
Thank you very much. For those people watching this on YouTube and for my residents generally, I would like to congratulate our park warden on pushing through, as well as Ivy Verdi, pushing through the green flag for Bradlaugh Fields. It's something that we should be intensely proud of, and I think Bradlaugh Fields itself is a wonderful place, and I think this Green Flag Award has added to it. So thanks to everyone. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Beardsworth?
Mr Mayor, could I come back on Councillor
Yes.
Russell, please?
In you go.
Thank you very much, Councillor Russell, for reminding me really to say well done to the park ranger there and to all at Bradlaugh Fields for an absolutely fantastic effort. That was it wasn't that long ago that Councillor Ansell and I were banging our head against a brick wall in frustration that we couldn't even get one green flag. Now we've got Abington Park that's had it many years in a row, as well as Delatpree having it many years in a row. So it's great that Bradlaugh Fields can join that that list, and well done to everybody involved.
Thank you. Councillor Beardsworth?
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether the tips will close through the lockdown. I went today to Brixworth tip to take some stuff, and the queue was a mile long, and I couldn't take it, so I brought it home again and put it back into the shed. But what's worrying me is that we've got a month's lockdown. If we don't have any of the tips open, we're going to see an increase in fly tipping. And I don't know if there's any way you're working with the County Council to see if this could be prevented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beardsworth.
Thank you, Councillor Beardsworth. Thank you, Councillor Beardsworth. Guidance has been being issued on various things from all of our portfolios all day long, and I haven't yet had a chance to catch up with any guidance issued on tips. But obviously, it doesn't form part of my portfolio. But I'm sure the leader of the County Council, who's on the Zoom call, heard your pleas to keep them open.
Councillor Hibbert? Is Councillor Hibbert with us, or has he gone missing again?
No, I'm here.
Good,
Mr. Mayor.
Good.
I was just unmuting myself. My report starts with the rapid rehousing pathway, and informs you all that we've been approved grant funding to cover the Somewhere Safe to Stay hub, which we've been working on with Key Stage Housing. I'm delighted with that, and opposition leaders have been fully briefed on this, and ward councillors have visited the site and were blown away, I think, by what they saw. I'm very grateful for their support. And in the meantime, since writing the report, we've now got confirmation through that we're going to get very exciting news. We're going to get the £2 million that will enable us to acquire 15 one-bedroom flats and 3 5-bedroom HMOs, all with ensuite facilities, and that will be used to expand the rehousing pathway for rough sleepers. Much of the information of what we've done through the summer and how well it's gone can be addressed if you have a look at Sue Faulkner's press release, which we issued the other day. That provides a lot of background information on that. As of now, and hopefully in a few days' time we'll get it through, we're waiting on another application for funding that will allow us to establish a dedicated rough sleeper drug and alcohol team. That's also an exciting project. And they will work intensively with people who are sleeping rough and have a dependency on drugs and or alcohol. I'm pleased to say that we've organised something for the sweat for the winter, and indeed the accommodation we've provided will give the rough sleepers some measure of privacy. I can't at the moment disclose where, but I know that will come out in due course anyway. And the other side of the homelessness thing is the prevention duty, of course, and the team worked incredibly hard to deal with that. And as I say in the report, in the 6 months up to the end of September, they've actually been able to prevent 539 different households from becoming homeless by staying in their present properties or by securing alternative accommodation for them. And although TA remains a problem for us, I am able to say that the figures remain stable at this time, which, bearing in mind the problems with COVID and everything else and everything that flows from COVID, that's quite pleasing in that way. Housing enforcement activity, you've only got to have a look in the Chronicle and Echo to see how successful we are there, and recent reports about significant action being taken against errant landlords. And our intelligence-led approach continues to work well. We have the support of the police. We work very closely with the police and all the other agencies. And that is really good. HMO licensing, we're continuing to license. There are 1,000 on the register. You can have a look at it. You may have some queries about the register. I've raised a few with the officers myself, so we'll see how that goes forward. The position between tenants and landlords and how they deal with the COVID problems, we held with the Student Landlord Network and other people from the university and what have you. We had a conference focusing on what is being done to protect students in accommodation. There was a shortage of counsellors in attending. I gave you all fair warning of it, but you can still watch it online, and you might want to tune in to find out exactly what the university are doing to protect their students. MPH are still obviously struggling to complete non-urgent repairs, but they're working through them, and I'm sure that everything will come. One of the interesting points there, I'm sorry, I'm going against myself. One of the interesting points there was the chief executive of MPH was very concerned about this issue of gas safety regulations, because interestingly, the authorities were not interested in the argument that we weren't receiving access to some of the properties because the tenants quite naturally didn't want people coming into housing. So that was something that concerned him, but they have been able to work through it, and we are 100% compliant. I finished the report with comments about the eviction and the government's ban, which has now been lifted. 6 months notice is still required normally to be given for evictions, except in cases involving ASB or domestic abuse. I'm pleased to see the government have stated that the courts will prioritise cases involving ASB, and along with those where landlords have not received any rent for more than a year, and in an inverse way that should give some comfort for tenants who have fallen on hard times. The general election, there is to add to that, there's a general eviction truce to run over Christmas. That's from the 11th December to the 11th of January. And I can also add from statistics I've been given that there have been no evictions from NPH property in the current year. The only other thing I perhaps ought to comment on from my recent discussions with MPH is that the right to buy figures revealed that they're very keen to bear down on applications that are seen to be scams, and I can tell you that they've identified 12 in the past year. Willing to take questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, there's just 8 seconds remaining up to 45 minutes, and 4 councillors have indicated to speak.
So we'll more probably get through the first 2, if they're quick.
Councillor, it's now 45 minutes, but you've got Councillor Beardsworth and Councillor Smith, the first 2.
Councillor Beardsworth, as brief as possible.
It's essential at this very time. Thank you.
Thank you. You still with us, Councillor Beardsworth?
I've just said I wanted to congratulate the team for the excellent work that they're doing with the homeless people and with getting the new accommodation.
Thank you, Sally. No reply, Councillor Hibbert. We'll call on Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very quickly, we've seen it's really good that the facilities are available for rough sleepers, but it does appear from what I've seen myself and from accounts that I've had from others that there appears to be an increase in rough sleeping again on the streets. I'm wondering if that's because people aren't aware of what's available, or because there's been a breakdown in the really positive take-up of the scheme that happened when it was first in place, and what we can do to make sure that people engage. With SWEP, with all the accommodation we've got available now and all the work that's being put in for rough sleepers, is it the case that anybody who seeks accommodation over the winter should be accommodated, and that hopefully we'll see less of a need for SWEP because of that? And then finally, I was just wondering what we've got in place for people who receive positive COVID tests and may not be able to go back to their previous accommodation, may have to self-isolate. What can we do to make sure that people like that don't end up, that there's something immediate in place for them and that they don't end up needing to rough sleep or anything like that if they're
Unfortunately, Councillor Smith, we've run out of time, unfortunately. I'm sure Councillor Hibbert will give you an answer to this out of the council chamber.
I'm happy to answer any questions that people want to put me outside the chamber. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hibbert. Opposition group business item 8. I invite Councillor Beardsworth to make a statement on Rose of the Shires. Councillor Beardsworth, you have 5 minutes. Councillor Nunn, 3 minutes to respond, and Councillor Beardsworth, 2 minutes to sum up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's a somewhat different slant on Rose of the Shires. I think the people that have volunteered, done exceptional things during this COVID, represent the rose in our shires. And I think that the people that stepped in last week to help children that were not having free school meals. I know the county council sent out vouchers through email, but it doesn't always reach the people that are in need. And I have to point out that one such lady that I know of, as Stephanie Van Bruin, who is a neighbour of mine, couldn't possibly stand the idea that children should go without food. And so she rang up and put it online that she would provide 30 meals a day for children. And she was contacted by Kings Heath School, who said, please come, we'd be delighted. So she cooked meals for the 5 days, took fruit, put vegetables in, made it extremely healthy. The children were absolutely delighted with it. In fact, I asked her, I said, why are you doing this? She said, I can't believe that no matter what, no child should ever go to bed hungry. And the kids ended up by naming me Mrs. Hope, because they knew they would not go hungry because she was supplying them with food. That is such a wonderful thing when you think that this government actually sits in Westminster having supplemented meals. It threw me back to the idea of watching Oliver, the film, where all the orphans were standing looking at the governors eating a feast on a table, and all they had was gruel. And I thought to myself, and they were singing the song, Food, Glorious Food. And I just thought to myself, in this day and age, this is still going on. Baroness Farsi was on Not the 9 O'Clock News, and she said it was Dickensian, and she was totally surprised with her own government. And I hope the people here tonight are totally surprised with the government, because when you think about the money it costs so little, and it's so important to feed children. They need nutrition to develop, to grow, to actually achieve things in their lives. And this, to me, needs to be sorted out before Christmas. The idea that people have to be cooking meals for children over Christmas when this government has subsidised meals itself is absolutely appalling. And I hope this that all of you here tonight will contact the 2 MPs for Northampton who voted down the free school meals and say, why can you justify that when you have free school meals? There was also a quote from one of the Conservative ladies, she's Selina Saxby, who said she doesn't have the subsidised meal, she takes a sandwich. But she said that all the people that supplied, the companies and the restaurants that helped this go ahead, if they came to the government for more money, they hoped that the government wouldn't get them any because they'd obviously found the extra money to feed these children. In this day and age, that this sort of thing could happen, to me, is absolutely appalling. And if we can't stand up to our MPs and say, this isn't right, the government isn't right on this, we need to make sure that they supply free school meals for all the holidays so that the children don't go hungry. You know, we see programs on televisions all the time and people are applying for you to send money to foreign countries to give children medicine or to actually supply food. And yet in this country, we still have children going hungry at night. It's really, really appalling. And I want to say thank you to all the people in Northampton that did a little bit to help those particular children. And thank you very much from the bottom of my heart that they did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunn, 3 minutes to respond.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much indeed. And may I just briefly, because I haven't got much to say on this, may I just briefly say, can we please send all our best wishes to Dennis, who would have originally proposed this. I understand he's not well. I've emailed him to give all our best wishes, but please, every best wish to him. It's always hard, Mr. Mayor, to prepare for opposition business because the title often doesn't represent what's in it, and this one has gone beyond the norm on that. But no problem with that. I note that we have a motion coming up shortly on the same subject, so perhaps comments for them. What has happened is that locally, the County Council have sorted this. They have responsibility for education, they have responsibility for social care and many allied points. Nobody wants children to be hungry, particularly those who are in positions of poverty. Now, I do know that a lot of benefits are paid direct, and at school, if you are having the meal, then every penny of that money goes, if I can put it so crudely, into the child's tummy. I think there are issues around whether that's quite the same with other types of voucher schemes. Nevertheless, it is fair to say that by Thursday last week, 11,500 eligible families had accessed the voucher scheme in Northamptonshire. And I think by the end of half term, pretty much most of the eligible families had access them. They can also be claimed after the holiday for anyone who wasn't able to access them. So that's just to know. So there was a response here locally. You know who and why and what and so on. The good news is it was covered. Is this a COVID related thing? I think COVID exacerbates it. Is it something that should continue afterwards? Many of us would probably say yes. In practical terms, I think the more extreme conditions that people have found themselves in COVID has probably brought this to the fore, the campaigning and indeed the action that we've seen. I think all in all, we live in a world where we're determined to make things better and better and better for people. And this has been an important thing to address at this time. So I'm glad that that's what's happened for those children in our area for whom we care so much. I think apart from that, no further comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bearsworth, 2 minutes to sum up.
Thank you, Councillor Lennon. And this isn't meant to be getting at this council at all. It's not to get at the county council, it's to get at the government, basically. And I believe that the government, I'm muted. No, I'm unmuted. The government,
no, you're all right.
Okay, the government haven't listened to the people, and they haven't seen the need. You know, the Christmas Carol, if you think about it, Scrooge only needed 4 ghosts to turn up to show him the error of their ways. But unfortunately, 2,000 paediatric consultants wrote to the Prime Minister and said that the impact of not having free school meals through the holidays would have a detrimental effect on children, didn't sway their thoughts at all. And I just thought, what will it take for this government to realise that these children desperately need care and help during the holidays? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Sally. Item 9, community governments and next step. If you wish to speak, will you blue hand Tracy? I call on Councillor Larratt to propose a report. Councillor Larratt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to present this report at item 9 on the agenda this evening. The report is to full council to put forward the recommendations of the cross-party working group on the 16th of September, and you will find attached to the report all the papers relating to that meeting. The actual agenda and all papers relating to that meeting are attached. I think, Mr. Mayor, it goes without saying that we do not want to be doing this. We do not want to be in a position where we have to go down the route of protecting Northampton's heritage, protecting its history, particularly the heritage and history surrounding the mayoralty and our wonderful Guildhall. So, but here we are where we are, we're going down the road of unitary, and it's only right, Mr. Mayor, that we continue to do what we can to protect the history and heritage of Northampton. We've already decided, and the decisions have been made and the orders have been made, that we are setting up a town council along with 2 other parishes, and those councils and parishes are already in existence. So, you know, Mr. Mayor, we now have to move forward and establish these councils and get things up and running and consider what assets it is we transfer to them. I mean, I think from my perspective, I don't believe that there's a town council with a mayoralty in Northampton without the Guildhall. I think it's important that Northampton's Guildhall is protected and is vested in the town council in order for the town council and the mayor to provide them as a base. And of course, other assets such as the rec centre and community centres in Kingsthorpe, because these new councils will want a base, and I think it's appropriate that that we do that. So just looking at the recommendations, Mr. Mayor, many of which, or sorry, say many, at least 4 of which are sort of holding recommendations because they all refer to a final report being brought back to this council at a later date or at a future meeting for the final decision to be made. I think that's 2.5, where we talk about services being transferred to the town council. While we suggest that some are suggested within the report that went to the working group, it's for the a further report for the working group to look at that further and come back with final recommendations. Similarly, in 2.9, Mr. Mayor, we are talking about the transfer of the borough's muniments, and again, while we've made some progress on that, we're not taking a decision tonight. It's basically an update that will again be a matter for the working group, and that will come back to this council for a final, full and final decision. Similarly, 2.10, Mr. Mayor, we have the agreement in principle. As I say, I think it's important that these assets transfer in order for the new councils to operate effectively. particularly the Guildhall there. But then again, we're not making a final decision on that tonight, but a further report will be coming in due course. But we're just making clear the principle there of those transfers. And finally, of course, Mr. Mayor, there's the question of precepts. And again, we're not agreeing any precepts or anything tonight. That will be a matter for a further report later on. So there's 4 of the recommendations which are basically sort of noting that there's more work to be done and accepting that reports will come back for a final decision in due course. As I say, Mr. Mayor, none of us want to be in this position, but we have to move forward. I think this report and the recommendations in it enable us to move forward, and that the working group can meet again as soon as possible in order to work them up and come back with the reports that are set out as soon as possible. The recommendations will also allow for the shadow town council to meet fairly soon, and for that council to start picking up some of the work that would be necessary to ensure its success from the 1st of April. That being obviously the need for a town clerk and setting that up and interviewing that, and similarly for the council to consider remuneration. I think it's also appropriate, having that we've already agreed that the mayoralty will go to the town council. That was part of the order that was agreed back in February, that the coat of arms goes as well. And obviously the town council needs to start considering its governance arrangements as well. So, Mr. Mayor, while I'm not happy to be going down this route, but we are where we are. We're in the unitary business now. That's where we're going, and it's only right that we do what we can to protect the heritage, the history of Northampton, and get these things moving so that the town council can carry on and with other councils to do that. So I'm happy to present the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunn to second the report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to second this report. If I may, I'll reserve my right to speak if there's a debate. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any speakers?
Mr. Mayor, we have 5 speakers indicating so far. The first is Councillor Danielle Stone. Then we have Councillor Emma Roberts, Councillor Jane Birch, Councillor Brian Markham, and Councillor Sally Beardsworth.
Councillor Stone.
Lovely, thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, I want to move reference back for this report. I don't think it should have come before us in the state that it is in now. I think we need to send it back and ask for further development of the report to come to council. I think that's what we are owed. This is our plan B. We're all very aware of that, but it's in all of our interest to work together to make the new local government arrangements, the town council and the parish councils, as successful as they possibly can be. I'm really disappointed with this report. It's exactly the same set of papers that came to the cross-party working group on the 16th of September. There's been no further work and no further development. I think this is an example of what we talked about earlier on in this meeting about democratic services not having their due capacity. I think instead of paying for an outside consultant, we should have increased the capacity within our own democratic services to do the work that is needed to be done. And I think this is a really clear example. So what do I think is wrong with what's being put in front of us? Well, I'll tell you something. Having a cross-party working group is not a substitute for proper members' briefings and taking all the members with us on this particular journey. So I am incredibly disappointed that we haven't had a scrutiny group looking at this, and we haven't had a proper members briefing, and neither have we gone out to the residents to talk about what we're doing either. And I think that adds to the democratic deficit. I think talking about us taking on the Guildhall without being specific about what that means and what the liabilities are going to be isn't good enough. We need much more exact information. Assets transfers and service transfer, we need
I'm
time
up, Councillor Stone,
we need
unfortunately.
costings, we need a lot more information. I move the motion to refer this back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Stone set out quite a lot of what I was going to say there. But the important point for me on this is it's exactly what I said about the previous report. There are so many holes in here. There's no references to funding. There's no references to budgets properly. There's a reference to transfer of an asset for Far Cotton, but there's no reference to anybody that currently resides in there or has access to it or utilises it. There's no reference to what any of those people are going to do. We're being asked to preside over 3 councils in effect for a period of time, yet nobody's had a conversation with me. I don't believe they've had a conversation with the other ward councillors that will be affected. There's been no communication around those points to ensure that we can do the best for our residents. This isn't about having a conversation about whether we do this. We know we're doing it. I'm not asking people to go back. I'm asking people to do this properly, get a report forward that sets things out properly so that people know exactly what they're going into, what financial burden they're going to be left with, and how they're going to get out of that. You don't set people up to soar with a report like this. You set people up to sink, and that's not fair on our residents.
Thank you. Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second Councillor Stone's proposal that we defer this report for all the reasons that have already been expressed. We have no knowledge about the detail. We haven't got sufficient detail. There hasn't been a members' briefing, and we have no detail on the costs. We cannot commit to further movement on this until we've had that opportunity to look at the utilities costs. You know, what is going to happen? Are we going to have the whole of the Guildhall? Are we going to have just the historical part of the Guildhall? How will the building be split? What is the time scale? We've got no time scales on this. Is it all going to happen on April the 1st? What about the projected costs to the Guildhall building itself? You know, £5,000, £500,000 for a roof, £500,000 for a boiler, £530,000 for ongoing maintenance over the next 5 years, £280,000 for M&E. Now, this is over a 5-year period. Those figures will double, no doubt, with inflation. You know, there are so many things that the members are not, they don't have sufficient detail on to take this forward. So, you know, I second Councillor Stone's proposal that we defer this until a later time when there is more information for us to make a sensible decision on something that is really very, very important to the future of the town.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Brian Markham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a great deal of sympathy with those saying this should be referred back. However, I noticed from the report, essentially, it's suggesting that on the 1st of April, we have a new town council. We have a new town mayor, Mr. Mayor, suggested from them, but certainly if not in April, May, we would. And it's suggesting, and we don't really know what all this is going to cost the residents of the town, specifically the town council. And we don't really know what functions it's going to take, inherit from the unitary, or indeed it already exists from the mayoralty, the building, the cost of running the building, how much it costs. In one part of the report, it mentions that there's 3.12, I think it's page 15, it mentions the various committees of that new town council. It mentions the possibility of an environment committee. That environment committee's function would be to look after parks and open spaces, according to this report, or possible function of that committee will be to look after parks and open. Now, are they suggesting that this town council's going to inherit all the parks and open spaces? Abington Park in its area, the racecourse, what do they do? So there's so many holes, but the recommendations here, the question is, who do you refer it back to? I think it would be wrong to refer this report back to that cross-party working group. I think that we have to move forward on this. We have to get somewhere and we have to get some answers. If the shadow town council and the shadow parishes, shadow Kingsthorpe and so on, have meetings with councillors represented on them, those meetings would be held in public. Those meetings would be zoomed and broadcast on YouTube. Those meetings people could come along to and make comments on whatever comes out in reports of those meetings. I think the way to involve the councillors in what's going to happen, I think, is to involve them, is to get the shadow authorities up and running. And then when they find out how much it's going to cost to run the Guildhall, then they can discuss that in open, in public, and whether that's something they go forward with. That would be my suggestion, rather than refer it back or kick it into the long grass. It's happening in 5 months' time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bearsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I have reservations about this. I have actually phoned the solicitor and I phoned Councillor Larratt to see if we could have a meeting sooner than this. This report was delivered to us on the 16th of September and has no changes in it at all to come up to today's meeting. That's 6 weeks that nothing's happened on it. And I really, really feel as though if people knew what was happening, they'd feel it's being done to them rather than with them. And I think it's so important when you're setting up a new council, a parish particularly, that you get the residents of that area involved as early as possible. And I think it's quite a good idea of Councillor Markhams to actually set up a virtual council in Kingsthorpe and in Farcotton and in the town, and those people that actually represent the people there will be speaking for them. And I think that would be a way forward. But I definitely think I'm really, really sad that all this time has been wasted, this 6 weeks, when we should have been progressing this further. It says here that when you actually apply the town chief executive, and they're saying that the cost of all that would be £23.50. That's just for the officers and the mayoralty and the other. That's not achieving anything in the wards at all. You'd have to put money on top of that. So it sends us a false message, you know, that if we pay £23.50, we'd be seeing a difference in the town, but you wouldn't be. You're just supplying somebody with a job. And I think that's what we need to discuss in depth. I know none of us wanted this, and it's a way that we've had to deal with it, but let's do it properly. Let's make it so that people understand it and want it, rather than pushing it down their throats. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Larratt, right to reply.
Mr. Mayor.
Hang on a minute. Oh,
Mr.
sorry.
Mayor. Mr. Mayor, Francis Fernandez. Hi, Mr. Mayor.
Hi, Francis.
Yep. Hi, Mr. Mayor. You've had a proposal, Mr. Mayor, from the floor, from Councillor Stone, to move to refer the report back to reconsider. And that's been seconded by Councillor Birch. So can I ask, Mr. Mayor, that the first thing you do is put to the vote whether that amendment to the recommendation is accepted by council, and depending on what I suggest the first vote is whether the report is referred back.
Or against. Mr. Mayor, am I allowed to speak on the reference back?
I should think you should speak first, Phil, and then we have a vote on it.
I've been indicating to speak.
Who's indicating?
Councillor Malpas.
Yeah, Councillor Malpas has had
Councillor Malpas
and Councillor Nunn.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm disappointed with the report. I'm really concerned about the obligations being put on to the town council, And yes, they've got the Guildhall to look after, and the only way they're going to end up doing that is by having to sell off some of the assets. I can see it, and it just worries me, the fact that we're pushing everything onto the town council without any sort of workable figures to sort of look at. And this is something I can't support, and I'm going to have to vote against it in some way, shape or form. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Larratt, right to reply.
Well, I want to speak on the
my motion. I've got the right to reply.
Yeah, but I would like to speak on Councillor. I would like to speak on Councillor Stone's motion, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have great sympathy with all the issues that have been put forward tonight. The idea of this report, and if you read the recommendations, it is actually to set up a meeting of the Shadow Authority in order for these issues to be discussed. We know that at the last working group meeting, we know there's a lot of unknowns with regards to costs, Mr. Mayor, and we recognise this, and that's why there's so much work still to be done that we need to get on with. At the meeting, our officers were there and were present and have gone away and are working up the cost of the things that we've suggested so far that town and parish councils may wish to take on. So that work is currently underway. It's not finished yet. That's why we need further meetings of the working group in order to do that. But I think Councillor Markham's absolutely right. And I think we need to get the shadow councils in place, which they are in place because they're in place through the order. We need to get a meeting of those councils in order for them to discuss all these issues and for them to consider themselves what it is they want to take on or they think they should take on and have the information with regard to costs. So I totally agree that that is the way forward, but we can't stop doing what we're already doing. Otherwise it will be lost and end up in the hands of the unitary. We must, Mr. Mayor, if we're going to do this for Northampton, crack on. But I totally agree. Let's fill in all these holes, which I recognise that people have talked about and have said, but let's do it through the shadow councils that can inform the working group in order to bring back recommendations that are acceptable to all. So I'm totally supportive of that, Mr. Mayor. Costs are an issue and we do need to take that on board, particularly those around the Guildhall. The Guildhall is an expensive building and we do need, the town council needs to be fully informed of what those costs are. And that's the work that's being done at the moment. The town council needs to know those, but let's give it to the town council for them to have a view and the working party can then come back in light of that view. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have a proposer and a seconder, so we need a motion. Councillor Stone?
I think Councillor Nunn has got his hand up, Mr. Mayor.
Come on, Councillor Nunn then.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure I'm specific to the motion, but certainly happy to comment. I agree with Councillor Markham. It would be useful to get the shadow meeting as quickly as possible. I was going to make a few other comments. Look, as Councillor Larratt says, this is not something any of us wanted, but we're dealing with this situation that we need to deal with pretty quickly. I'm reluctant to stall this now, but I think, and member briefings also an excellent idea. It's a cross-party group. We have the opportunity to brief our groups. Perhaps we need to do that better, and an all-member briefing might be the answer to that. I would just quickly mention that the council has done everything it can to support this, and even, you know, Councillor Stone's comments about the consultant. This is not a job for specifically a democratic support officer to be drafted in without prior knowledge, or you know, who knows who you might recruit. But what we have done is found the money to commission the best possible specialists. The individual person and the organisation NCALC are the most fantastic organisation to guide new councils into formation and to know the detail of the law. So we've absolutely put everything in terms of that support. We can't stall it because it's a pressing problem, and we can't kick the can down the road to the unitary, because actually part of what we're doing is to make sure that we have passed on when the unitary arrives, the things that we treasure most, perhaps such as the Guildhall, to local people to look after and to hold. So my thought would be to keep things rolling, agree where we are today. What it does enable us to do is fix a shadow meeting, member briefing, as many other things as we want to bottom out these costs. But the alternative, I think, is that we let it all disappear down the road, then find that it's all part of the new unitary, which might work out fine. We may have no fears there, but it's not what everybody, I thought, set out to achieve. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, Francis Fernandez again. Sorry to interrupt again, Mr. Mayor. The issue is now we are on a vote for Councillor Stone's proposed amendment to refer back. I mean, the right of reply in an amendment does actually go to the mover of the original. Councillor had the right of reply to that amendment. Now, in terms of process, can I suggest, Mr. Mayor, we now go to a vote. We go for a vote on the proposed amendment.
The mayor has left the meeting.
Oh.
Yes, the mayor has left the meeting at the moment.
I didn't hear what Francis was advising.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Now I can.
I disappeared. Somebody switched me off. I'm back again.
Okay.
I can hear you,
Okay,
Francis, and I agree with you.
Okay.
I didn't
the
hear you,
amendment
Francis.
doesn't have a right to reply. Somebody's moved an amendment and we vote on the amendment. There's no right to reply on moving an amendment to a report, surely.
Yeah. What I
What were you,
suggest,
Francis?
Mr. Mayor,
Carry on,
is now
Francis.
vote. Yeah, we go to it for a vote on the. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes. Can I know what the
I
amendment
suggest is now
for
we move
people
to a vote. Yeah. The amendment is to refer the report back to the working group. So that's what the amendment, which has been seconded. So I suggest that council takes a vote on that.
Ed's just getting the poll ready. The poll is now ready. You'll have 30 seconds to cast your vote.
Tracy, I may hold back in case I have to give a casting vote.
Councillors, there are 19 votes against, 18 votes for, and 1 councillor abstained.
The motion falls, is that correct?
Falls.
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 So to fill.
Are you there, Mr. Mayor?
I'm here.
Has he
I
voted?
didn't vote. I didn't vote in case I don't have to have a casting vote.
So, Mr. Mayor, we now have back to the substantive recommendations. Can I move that we formally put the recommendations as contained within the report forward? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Notice of motion item 10.
Hang on, Mr. Mayor, we need a vote.
We haven't voted.
Oh, I thought we'd
Mr.
had a
Mayor,
vote.
The polling is just about to be launched for
Go on
the
then.
vote. Mr. Mayor, there are 19 councillors voted for, 17 against and 3 abstained.
Thank you. So the motion is passed. Item 10, notice of motion, motion 1.
Mr. Mayor, we have proposed an amendment, I think.
Yeah.
Are we
Mr.
not
Mayor,
hearing from
there's
the
3
speaker?
speakers.
Thank you, Tracy.
You've got Mr. Robin Burgess, Ms. Anne Wankiri and Ms. Rachel McGrath.
Thank you. Mr. Burgess?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm giving a point of information really in relation to this. Many of you will be aware that I'm coordinating on behalf of the County Council the administration of the government's award towards addressing food and other poverty within this part of the county. That covers the whole of the West Northamptonshire area, and we have been allocated a share of the 63 million which the government has awarded. Of that, 310,000 is available for immediate relief of poverty within this part of the county, and we're in the process of administering that. So far, 144,000 of that has been awarded to a large number of different organisations, many of whom are working together as part of an alliance of food banks and food aid organisations, many of whom are located in the Northampton specific area, but of course we do also cover and South Northampton and Daventry. Over the next few months, more of that funding will be allocated. So that's just for information. Obviously, the Borough Council is involved in helping to make the decisions on the award of that funding towards different food aid projects. But in relation to the specific motion that's been posed by Councillor by Emma, this one is to support a wider on top of the funding that has been awarded. So the point I'd like to make as the coordinator of, or the sort of facilitator of a lot of collective work by a number of food aid charities is that notwithstanding that considerable sum of money that has been awarded and is being spent within the county alongside other monies that have been spent, there is still an enormous well of need and demand amongst people on the very lowest of incomes, people in real poverty. And we are seeing new people who have never before sought help with benefits or have ever approached food banks or food aid projects.
Thank you. Thank you. Anne Wankiri.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me for this. I
Hi.
am speaking on behalf of the BAME households and children who struggle not only in term times but also during the holidays, where some of the children are not eligible for the free school meals just because of the status of their parents' immigration. If our parents have no recourse to public funds, the children are not eligible for school meals. So we're kind of providing the school parcels, but we need a lot more help and support from the council and other organisations to ensure that no children are falling through the cracks and going hungry. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel McGrath.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Councillors, for allowing me to speak. I'm representing Northamptonshire Food Poverty Network, which is facilitated by Northamptonshire Community Foundation, representing a network of county-wide organisations. We've already spoken to your food poverty scrutiny panel, the results of which are coming out on Monday, the 9th of November. One of the contributing local factors in terms of rising child food insecurity that was highlighted to that scrutiny panel was the fact that there is an expectation that voluntary organisations will continue to meet the gap. Those voluntary organisations are already themselves looking at an unsure future due to not necessarily being able to sustain and secure their own funding. And during this time, children and families are struggling to meet their most basic needs. And being able to provide this additional resource through the Borough Council will help provide assurance to families locked in the struggle to make ends meet, particularly during this public health crisis of the coronavirus pandemic. Hunger, as we all know, is a debilitating experience. It damages physical health, it comes to great personal stress, and it's a social harm. Food poverty brings profound anxiety and stress into family life, which can trigger a massively negative impact. Now, the government's own food poverty czar, Henry Dimbleby, who heads up the government's national food strategy, has already said about holiday hunger that this problem is very real, and it should go without saying. It's serious, it's immediate, and it's going to get worse as unemployment gets worse. We know that many other councils are backing free meals with a commitment to lobby government to support these. We know that child poverty, the long-term solution, is systemic policies, which address systemic inequalities in our society. But in the short term, we have a moral responsibility to support children and families who are struggling at this time. The solutions are there, and we need the political will to tackle the issue head on. No one should be going hungry in 2020. The provision of holiday sort of school meals has already been covered by Scottish and Welsh governments. And in the absence of our own government currently following suit, I think I welcome all the local councils who have made a decision to actually provide free school meals during this time. The Coalition to End Child Poverty has shown that after housing costs, there are around 11,721 children living in poverty in Northampton right now. The existence and prevalence of food poverty in the 6th richest country in the world is a massive failure of political policy. We have a responsibility to our local citizens and communities. And we know that there is a genuine problem with holiday hunger.
That's 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. An amendment has been submitted by Councillor Nunn. Councillor Roberts, do you accept the amendment as an alteration?
I am willing to accept the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Roberts to propose a motion as altered.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important to note that I accept the amendment and the altered motion, but I think the commentary provided by Robin and Rachel are even more crucial. We have, as a borough, provided some support, but that support isn't enough. It's not enough locally, and it's not enough nationally. And we have to do things in addition to the funding that was already there. When I brought this motion, or a motion similar to this, last year, I couldn't understand the feeling that was against it. There was a distinct, this doesn't happen, we've not seen this. People were gobsmacked. They'd never heard of this happening in their town. Well, it was happening then, and it is happening now. And, you know, COVID is a natural phenomenon, but poverty certainly is not. It would have been important to pass that motion then, and it's extraordinarily important to pass this motion now. We've got to ensure that we do everything we can, and we've got a joined up and cohesive approach to the problem. As Rachel said, no child in this country in 2020 should be without a square meal, and no parent should be concerned about whether they feed themselves or they feed their children. We have since, proposing the motion originally, now been faced with a pandemic, and according to the End Child Poverty Coalition, figures have spiked and have soared. Claimants of free school meals are up by 24%, and unemployment benefits are up by 50% in Northampton. So we can see that this is just moving to a point where we've got to have this additional funding right now. We need ambitious plans to tackle poverty, and this motion, I believe, goes some way to allowing Northampton to set out its stall. Northampton can say that we want to be ambitious on all counts and that we want to deliver a message. This isn't going to continue to happen in our town. Failure to act on this now is unconscionable. We've got to find gaps and we've got to work out a way to plug them. We've got to do some mapping to understand where the gaps are in our town and where we can direct that funding. We've got to do that with food aid, but we've got to do that with a harness of the holiday clubs and the social aspect that comes from those to help with isolation. I could quote lots more figures, lots and lots of them, and more evidence about absolute need. But I just wanted to finish on reading a really small element from a poem that really touched me and I thought summed up exactly what I meant here. Poverty is not entertainment. It's not noble or romantic. Poverty is heavy. It's heavy hearts and heavy legs. It's sore skin and hollow eyes. It's upset and downhearted. It's hunger. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I'll call on Councillor Burt to second the motion as altered.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, our local situation is something that we have some control over, and we must not shy away from that. But, you know, why are over 17,000 children in Northamptonshire eligible for the free school meals? Why are there over 11,000 children living in poverty in Northampton? After 10 years of austerity, we see the rise of food banks, hidden homelessness and the decimation of legal aid, denial of benefits to the severely disabled and the impoverishment of single mothers. COVID-19 and the pandemic has added to the stresses and strains on already vulnerable families. There are additional worries now of redundancy and loss of jobs, fragile tenancies, overcrowded homes, debt, alcohol and drug abuse, domestic violence, and the mental health of both parents and children. Their families are even under greater stress at the moment. Children in poverty are 5.5 times more likely to go hungry. And we know that poverty has a devastating impact on children's lives. Children from low-income families are often hungry. They're too hungry to sleep and then too tired and too hungry to engage in lessons in school. They underachieve at school. By GCSE, there's a 28% gap between the children receiving free school meals and their peers. This affects their future employment and life chances. Food poverty affects children's physical development and health, their ability to concentrate and thrive at school. They can feel isolated, stigmatized, and cut off from learning and social opportunities, all because their parents can't afford enough food. This is shameful in a society that believes every child matters. Poverty is the underlying factor in children's hunger. We're living in a period of deep political and economic uncertainty. Brexit is imminent, along with the implementation of further costs to welfare benefits and rising inflation, including food prices. Just check your supermarket bill. It's gone up. The situation for families who are struggling to feed themselves is unlikely to improve. Radical change is needed to tackle the food poverty of children and families. And we call on our MPs and the government to not only look at the holiday hunger and provision of school meals during those holidays and activities for children to address their social and emotional needs, but we look to our MPs and the government to make the use of the research on budget standards to ensure that wages and benefits in combination are adequate for socially acceptable standards of living and eating. There needs to be recognition of the fundamental role of food in health and social inclusion. When we also call on our MPs and the government to make free school meals available to families on universal credit and to continue to support this through the school holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
For 4 councillors are indicating to speak. Councillor
4.
Sally Beardsworth,
Yeah.
Councillor Matt Golby, Councillor
Yeah.
Jonathan Nunn, and Councillor
Yeah.
Danielle Stone.
Okay. Councillor Beardsworth. Councillor Beardsworth.
Unmute. That's it. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr.
you're
Mayor.
there.
Yes, thank you. Totally agree with the sentiments that have been said already tonight by the proposer and seconder of the motion. But I think what we don't realise is that the early intervention grants that's been cut by £1.7 billion since 2010 have had a huge impact on early living for children, and it has to be reinstated as soon as possible. These sort of things, cutting grants, cutting things for people that are in desperate need, you know, it surprises me even today when I read that these 2,000 paediatric consultants have written to the government and said, this is so important that children get the right food, that they don't go hungry because of their development. And still, it doesn't make any difference. What do people have to do to demonstrate to this government and our MPs the struggle people are having every day to feed their children? I can remember when my kids were growing up, they were always hungry, always hungry. You know, I say they got hollow legs, but they just used to eat all the time. And I had the money and the wherewithal to feed them. But people haven't got that, and they're going without food themselves, going without clothes, doing without to feed their children. And it shouldn't be in this day and age, in the 21st century, that we should be suffering like this. Children need to be fed so they develop properly. And if you can't do that, you are not doing your job as a government. And they should look to themselves, especially with their subsidised meals in their restaurants. That even adds fury to the fuel of people who think that they can go in there and have subsidised steak for their dinner. And we can't feed the children in Northampton because they're too poor. I totally support this motion.
Councillor Colby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, as with colleagues have mentioned, I'm also happy to support the amended motion, and I try not to speak from my perspective as in my role at the county council when we're at Northampton Borough Council meetings. But I think in this case, I'm going to make an exception, because when colleagues and I were discussing what we could do from the county council's perspective, we came to the conclusion that to do something is the right thing to do. And we have had quite a significant amount of government money throughout COVID, which the majority has been quite unring-fenced. So it was quite an easy question to answer. Let's try and do something and put something in place that we can try and help those families throughout the half-term break. And I'm actually very proud of the response the county council made. It all happened very quickly, I have to say, and there was a slight delay in rolling it out because we had to make sure we put a robust system in place. And as Councillor Nunn alluded to, the figures that by Thursday last week, 11,788 families had actually accessed the voucher provision out of a possible eligible 17-odd thousand. So I think that's quite good going in a short space of time. And also that when the children do return to school, the schools are going to be checking that if any of those families have missed out, they will be able to claim the vouchers retrospectively. Of course, that doesn't decry the need to tackle poverty and to tackle many of the social issues that other colleagues have been brought out, have been speaking about this evening. As we move forward to Christmas, and that's mentioned in the motion and in the amendment, we've obviously got to all work together to make sure we put something in place to make sure that we can carry on and help to feed those families, because as I say, we have had quite a bit of money through government. I know the MPs, I spoke with the MPs when we were looking to put this scheme in place, and of course they were all very keen that we did something. And you know, the next part is how we can all work together, whether it's through the through the borough councils, the brilliant community groups and businesses that have come forward to say they're going to help. So between all of us, with government as well, I'm sure we can work on putting something in place for Christmas, and I'm sure those families can feed their children. So I'm very happy to support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunn?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I apologise for turning my camera off? My internet's not good, and it does seem to improve it. If I do that, that's why you see me go on and off. Naturally, we'll support this. Can I thank Councillor Roberts for graciously accepting the amendment? It is a source of regret to me that we looked at something similar, as she says, a year or so ago. The way we approached it just didn't quite work, and the loser was the fact that we didn't therefore do something that we do need to do. What we have here now, in my thought, largely keeping those recommendations as they initially, as she had initially phrased them, is something we really can get behind and work on. And we'll commit to doing that. We have the usual caveat. There is never any money around. We'll find a way of doing something. I'm not sure where that'll come from, but I do know that when you get the best expertise in the room and you work together, you can normally find something that looks pretty good. And I think if we put the collective expertise and resource together that we see here, I think we can be successful in achieving some further strides forward on this whole sort of agenda. I would consequently then propose that if this is a start, that we need somebody here to take some action, that I would like to meet with Councillor Roberts, and I know the expertise that the three speakers on this evening have by reputation. Propose that we urgently get a meeting together with those. I'll think carefully about whether we can get some officers from the borough and so on, so that we can actually start something off on this really quick over the course of the next few days. If Councillor Roberts would like to facilitate that in approaching me, we can get something sorted really quickly. But glad to be supporting this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stone?
Thank you very much. I can't remember the last time at a council meeting when I felt so sick, really, and I welcome the public speakers. Thank you very much, and all the councillors that have spoken. So why do I feel sick? Because we shouldn't be in this place at all. We should not be living in a society that we have structured, which has created so much poverty and all the attendant misery and hardships that go along with it. One of the things that's really strikingly obvious is that if local authorities can make a response, if the community groups can make a response, and so can government. And what has emerged here is a huge gap between government and the rest of us, where they think they know best, but they don't know what it's like on the ground. How are we going to make government listen to local authorities better? How are we going to make government listen to our communities better? How are we going to make government respect the needs of our children a lot more? Because this problem is not going to go away. We might do Christmas, we might do Easter, it is not going to go away. Radio 4 this morning was reporting that it's really well-heeled families that are used to looking after themselves and their children really well, and now rocking up to food banks because they've lost their jobs, their mortgages are under threat, and they're absolutely desperate for support. This should not be a private shame. It is a public disaster. And I am really glad that we have got in this town the wherewithal to have a coordinated approach in the way that Councillor Nunn has described. I think we can do that, and we can do it really quickly. But we need to go beyond that. We need to meet immediate need. We need to have a medium to longer term plan. But in the end, we need to be saying to government, this is enough. You have to lift the cap on benefits to the third, fourth or fifth child. That is contributing to children being in poverty. We've got to stop 0 hours and casualised work. We've got to give people proper wages for proper jobs. The thing that is going to be missing, if we are not very, very careful, is what Anne was talking about from United Africa. Those families, those children who are not part of the free school meal regime, whose parents either earn just that little bit too much, or whose families fall out of the welfare system altogether. Huge numbers, too many of those families too many of those children. They have particular needs, and they need to be brought in and looked after as well. And I think that whole ambition about providing social care as well as food is really absolutely the right way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stone.
Councillor Eales, Gareth Eales is also indicating to speak.
Councillor Eales.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, I think it's wonderful that the chamber can come together cross-party and all in a united a display of virtue signalling. But it's I was very pleased with the county council's response. It is fairly evident to me, despite the rhetoric that was coming out of government, that there wasn't actually a plan or a request from the government for local authorities to pick up the slack. It was something that was done very late in the day. That we had the government provide funding over the summer to provide free school meals, but there clearly wasn't a plan to deal with it this time around. And that has got to change when we head towards December. There has got to be a concerted effort at every level of government, local, national, regional, whatever, to make sure that we don't get into this mess again. And we've got to get our priorities right. But I'd also like to thank the leader of Northampton Borough Council, a couple of councillors I saw on social media, and indeed some Conservative Party members, for their very honest analysis of the debacle that the government got itself into last week. And I think as long as we can continue with this concerted effort of trying to put aside party politics, not just labelling someone as virtue signalling for having the bloody nerve to bring a motion into Parliament to end holiday hunger, I think it's deplorable. So I think we're actually setting the standard here tonight as what can be done and what should be done, and how issues should be approached moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor. I call on Councillor Roberts as a mover to exercise a right of reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I extremely welcome Councillor Nunn's commentary with regards to a meeting and getting the right people around the table. I would love to be involved in every inch of that. This obviously means a lot to me, as it does a number of other people. I share his disappointment that we didn't pass this earlier, because we could have been a long way down the road. Aside from the free school meals aspect, we could have been a long way down the road. As far as the work that the county council have done, I appreciate and welcome the decision to provide those meals. I think we absolutely have to analyse those numbers that Councillor Golby's talking about, because reports to me on the ground are slightly different. I've got reports of only half the children in the families receiving vouchers, and a significant number of families not receiving any email at all, and they're not being able to access the link. So we can't debate that now. That's a county council issue, I appreciate, but you talked about what you've done. So I'd really like to analyse those numbers and dig down. If we are going to do anything at a local level for the Christmas scheme, rather than get the government to do what they should be doing, then we absolutely have to make sure that we start work on that this week and next week, so we don't end up in the same position again. I'm extremely proud and happy that it sounds like we are going to get unanimous support for this motion, and I can't wait to start working on making a difference with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I call it to the vote.
Mr. Mayor, Ed will launch the poll shortly.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
Mr. Mayor, the 37 councillors have voted for, none against, and one councillor has abstained.
Thank you. We move to motion 2. I've got 3 speakers on this. I call on Alice Whitehead.
Lovely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you all hear me? Hi.
Yes, I can hear you.
So I'm Alice Whitehead. I'm a resident of Far Cotton, Northampton, and I founded Save Our Street Trees in 2016 to promote, protect, and crucially replant vitally important urban trees in Northampton, which over the last 50 years have been increasingly under threat. Through petitions, events, strong local support, and with the expertise and urban forester Russell Horsey, who are here today, we've planted 10 trees in Far Cotton in 2019 as part of a pilot scheme. We would like this to be a blueprint blueprint for similar schemes across the county. At the heart of any scheme, however, is a proactive, positive tree policy that properly maintains, protects and replaces urban trees. And we are very grateful for Councillor Emma Roberts' support in bringing this motion to you today. When you read through the current tree policy, many words jump out at you: nuisance, hazards, obstruction, risk, conflicts. While the policy does include a paragraph on the benefits of trees, the bulk of the policy approaches trees as a problem. However, there is much research that shows trees can help councils save money. Street trees can reduce the amount of fuel used to heat and cool buildings. Tree-lined streets encourage slower driving. People spend 11% more on goods and services in these areas. Urban trees increase the life of a road by reducing surface temperatures. Street trees reduce water runoff and the chances of flooding. Areas with higher vegetation have lower rates of crime and littering. And above all, trees help residents become happier and healthier, and therefore less reliant on health services. Anecdotally, people living on Penryn Road, where I live, have said these new trees have given them hope during difficult times. And the evidence suggests that trees planted closer to people's homes bring the biggest benefits. I think you'll agree that there's never been a more important time during lockdown for people to have a greener view from their windows. We believe trees should be a central feature of planning and development and not a victim of it. When one tree is removed, another suitable species is put in its place, not planted elsewhere in the borough. There should be a regular and sustainable programme of maintenance which nips problems in the bud before they arise. This council is committed to making Northampton carbon neutral by 2030, and we believe trees should be at the heart of this target, not just in woodlands and parks, but on our highways as well. With the forming of a new unitary authority, this is a perfect time to make changes to the tree policy to reflect a more positive, proactive attitude towards trees. We urge you to...
30 seconds remain.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Joe Cole.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I can't really add a great deal to Alice's impassioned speech there, but I represent the Woodland Trust, which is the largest tree and woodland charity in the UK. And the urban programme that I lead for the Trust is about communities trying to retain and improve their urban forests, so protecting trees from felling for various reasons, and for actually creating ambitious targets to increase the number of trees that we have in towns and cities, and thereby try to combat some of the climate emergency issues that we face. It goes way beyond the climate change and the environmental benefits, though. It's about the societal benefits of having trees on streets right outside people's doorsteps. So some of the things that Alice mentioned there about the kind of the feeling of hope, the health and well-being benefits that trees in urban places can bring are a significant benefit to the residents, but also to the climate change through other methods. So it's not just about carbon being sucked out of the atmosphere and placed into a tree and absorbed. It's about changing people's lifestyles. So it's known that when people are engaged in tree planting or tree protection activities, they go on to lead much more sustainable, healthier lifestyles just from the very nature of being involved with environmental causes. Alice brought her project to our attention in 2017 amid some serious high-profile cases of tree felling across the UK, and we actually chose Alice to be one of our 3 award winners in 2018 as a street tree hero, working really hard to get these important policies in place. And it's really crucial that the Woodland Trust continues that support. There is funding available out there for tree planting. We stand ready to support Alice and her community in her cause to continue the fantastic work that she achieved last year, but more importantly, to spread this message wider across Northampton. It's not about planting trees on streets where the Woodland Trust can pay for it. It's about bringing policies in place that really create a social equality about trees, so that trees are in the places where people live, regardless of who they are, regardless of their economic background. It's about that social equality. Remaining. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross Horsey.
Yep. Okay. Good evening.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm an independent chartered arboriculturalist who spent the last 20 years managing urban trees and forests across the UK. One of the things that's come out of the pandemic, I think it's highlighted the importance of our urban trees and woodlands as residents spend a lot more time locally and at home. I think it's really positive to see this motion in terms of the tree policy being looked at again. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the borough to improve its current policy. And more importantly, I think it's about setting the tone through your policy and how it influences where the unit tree goes in the future. You know, the unit tree coming together is a massive opportunity to see more trees and more woodland planted across the whole of Northampton. And it's very timely. The government have just finished consulting on the English tree strategy. And a key part of this is around community engagement, tree planting and improved tree strategies. To meet climate targets, we're going to have to see a continuation of urban tree funding. And we've seen a lot of funding in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of urban tree planting. And where we've seen bids through recently awarded through the government, these have been where we've seen strong positive policies as well as ground delivery and community engagement like you're seeing with Alice's group. As Alice has mentioned, science shows us that trees planted close to people and close to pollution sources are where society gets the greatest benefits, both in terms of pollution removal, health, both through physical and mental health. But it's not just a numbers game. So I'd urge you all to start thinking in terms of canopy cover improvements across your wards rather than just numbers of trees planted. And as Alice has highlighted, it's important that you manage these trees. So it's about planting the right trees in the right place. The proposed amendment talks about the adoption of CAVAT, and some of you may not have come across CAVAT before. Professionally, I would support this. CAVAT is a great tool designed by council officers from across the country and used by councils across the UK. CAVAT helps councils to defend their trees from loss by giving defendable pound values that engineers and insurers understand. So when people propose to remove public trees, you can say, actually, these trees are worth it. These trees have a lot of value. And in many cases where CAVAT values have been put in by other councils, engineers and planners have changed designs to retain important public trees. And where trees are being lost, sufficient compensation is then provided to pay for good quality replanting. Lastly, I think it's really important for councils to continue to invest in your staff so that opportunities are not lost, especially in terms of new trees and green infrastructure, new developments, and through new transport infrastructure, of which we're going to see more and more in your area. The government's recently committed to more tree-lined streets as part of new developments, and strong policies will help your officers in their roles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call on Councillor Roberts to propose a motion.
Can I speak? Mr. Mayor, can I say something, please?
Go on in, quickly.
Thank you. Why does it have to be quickly?
Well, it's time. We've got another 2 motions after this.
Oh, right. Well, it will be quick.
Carry on.
It will be quick.
Carry on.
I very rarely speak, as you know.
Mr. Mayor, I haven't moved the motion as yet. Sorry.
No, I haven't.
Are you speaking on the motion? Shall I put you down as a speaker?
I just want to say, I want to speak something on it, please, if I may.
Well, wait till we debate the motion.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment. Comment.
You'll be first on the list.
Oh, right.
Councillor Roberts to propose a motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and a huge thank you to the speakers for not only waiting all of this time to speak and bearing with everybody, but bringing such excellent information and insight to the motion. I was really proud to work with Alice a couple of times over the last couple of years, and I've been really proud to see what they've achieved in the area. Alice not only brings trees to the street, she brings an understanding of the need and an understanding of the benefits, which can help people work together to see the positive goals. I believe we need a complete overhaul of our tree policy. We've got to harness the numerous health and wellbeing benefits of urban street trees. We can't be shy about the fact, however, that we see many complaints about tree coverage and locality and type across the town, but that's because we've never had a coherent tree policy. This is a missing link, in my opinion, in terms of the residential protection, our fight against climate change, and the protection of our urban street trees. Our current policy is significantly lacking in substance and action. I believe as the current sovereign authority speaking up for Northampton, we should be seeking to embed our policies now, which will make the Unity Tree Authority work for all. I've asked questions around a tree policy and a working group and discussions for many months now at scrutiny. And I believe that we can't continue to rely on the policy we've got and to make the mistakes that we continue to make and then subsequently pay for. I don't believe our current ID Verde contract is supporting the correct maintenance. And I think that's because we don't have the right policy in place and we don't have everybody joined up to adhere to something. Land ownership and responsibility, mapping, all of that is missing. And we have to take an interest in the CAVAT model that Russell eloquently explained. We can do that by looking at what it is for us and how it affects us, the capital asset valuation of amenity trees. And we can do this by a simple term in our tree policy. The council will seek compensation from any external organisation responsible for significant damage to or removal of any council-owned trees to the value calculated by CAVAT. As Russell explained, we place a figure on that, a figure that insurers and private organisations understand, and we seek to bring that back into the authority. Many councils who are seen as exemplar at this have adopted and recognised the benefits of that type of policy. We need to draw a line under our current policy now. We need to go bold, and we need to ensure that we grab this opportunity to make a serious change. And I urge everybody tonight to give the people that have spent so much time and effort in understanding what we need for our town, to show them that we understand what we need for our town as far as a tree policy is concerned. I urge everyone to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Joyce to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to second this motion tonight. It clearly sets out a green way forward to ensure that we have a clearly defined planning strategy on looking after and protecting our urban street trees for today's and future residents of our town. Our own local NBC Climate Change Forum, which was formed last year, has brought together many residents and activists from all parties from across our county to try and shape a carbon neutral vision for 2030 in Northampton. This motion tonight would make a welcome addition to that action plan. This year so far, we have had the wettest February on record and the hottest weather ever recorded for the month of May. Since the council's tree policy was last written in 2016, our planet has experienced some of the hottest years ever on record. Ultimately, a greener, safer environment benefits us all. I recommend and urge that all our councillors here tonight support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joyce. Councillor Fable.
Well, I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, whether I should speak now. It depends whether the cabinet member is going to speak. If he is, I could speak after him if you like.
Okay, I've got no names up at the moment.
Councillor Sargent, we have Councillor Brian Markham and Councillor Mike Hallam indicating to speak as well.
Right.
Well, I'm very happy to speak now, if that's all right.
Go on, far away. You was first.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Really, what I just wanted to say was I so agree with everybody that's spoken tonight about the trees. When I first became a councillor, which is almost 20 years ago now, I was part of an environment team. And the one thing I wanted to do was plant trees. I particularly wanted to plant them in Bridge Street because it's such a bare street. The officers at the time, who now are no longer with us, oh no, you can't do that. The branches will touch the buses. Well, I thought that was a ridiculous thing to say at the time. And I do agree with planting trees in the town. We're now bringing more and more people into the town. Places have been turned into flats. More students are coming. And I just be in favour of planting them on any of the streets that we can. We have them in Guildhall Road in containers, and that works very well. So that's all I wanted to say, Mr. Mayor, was that I think this is a very good motion to come forward, and we should be looking into planting trees, not only in urban areas, but in the town centre.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flavel. Ryan Markham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what's not been mentioned too much, and excellent presentations as to the importance of trees in our environment, for the environment, and for our welfare. In fact, I think you've seen a picture of me last week, Mr. Mayor, planting a tree, although with the help of a digger.
Yes.
And also, but the importance of the new unitary and having a new tree policy for that unitary and maybe for our town council as well, I think so be straight. I'm sure many councillors have so frustrated over the years that when it's come to urban trees and street trees in particular, of course, it's the county council that's taken that. And the county council policy was we don't have any money to look after the trees we do have on our pavements, and therefore, if we can't maintain them, if they're diseased or whatever, we chop them down. And most specifically, they never had any money to replace those trees. And if you ask for, and I say I was planting a tree last week. Just over a year ago, I had opportunity. Some residents offered to fund and help funds if I'd use some community funds to put a tree up on what turned out to be county council highways land. No trees on there, a large roundabout. They wouldn't have a tree given to them free of charge and planted free of charge on their roundabout, because in 20 years' time they might have to fund the maintenance of that tree. Now, how ridiculous! I mean, this. Yeah. Anyway, I look forward to the one thing will happen with the unitary. We will no longer be forced to pay. Well, that's not our tree. That's their tree. That's somebody else's tree. We can't maintain it. We're not responsible for it. So let's get on with it. I was very much support this motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hallam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our group will be supporting this motion. Lots of really good work has been done in the area of trees, as well as the initial planting project that we did working with Alice and the Woodland Trust at the end of 2019. At the start of this year, it was one of my aims that we'd be able to kickstart lots of tree projects in lots of areas, and we'd had a lot of interest from various community groups and parish councils. Unfortunately, the pandemic meant that all special projects such as this had to be put on hold to allow us to rightly prioritise our daily service provision, and much of the work that officers have been doing has been focusing on working around the pandemic. And we've talked a lot about officer workload this evening, and that's why kind of special projects got put to one side. So it makes sense to review the tree policy. Much has changed since the last one, and the council's aims and objectives as well around the climate emergency. So I look forward to involving Alice, Russell and Joe, as well as other councillors too. We're happy to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hallam.
The Mayor, Councillor Phil Larratt is now indicating to speak as well.
Thank you. Councillor Larratt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too totally supportive of this motion, and fully recognise the need for the tree policy to be reviewed. As Councillor Hallam has just said, a lot's changed since it was developed, and we need to take things forward. And going into the unitary, I think this is the right time and the right opportunity to actually do it. I totally agree with Councillor Markham with the problems we have with highways. I've massive problems with trees in East Hunsbury. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for planting trees, but the right species in the right place, not up against people's garden fences where I end up with constituents of 75 years of age, you know, falling off ladders trying to manage them. We've got to get the right trees in the right place, and highway trees, I think, from my understanding, are the main problem we've got. But yes, let's plant them. I'd love to see them replanted up Park Avenue North, near where I live, where a lot were taken out. It would be fantastic to get them put back as soon as we possibly can. But we've also got to get, Mr. Mayor, make sure, as I said, we get the right trees in the right place, and that we don't ignore trees that are a nuisance to residents, because they do have, in many occasions, significant concerns, and they are a significant problem. As I say, constituents of 75 years of age falling off ladders trying to manage them is not acceptable. You know, the trees could have been planted elsewhere, further away from the property fence, etc. And it's got so bad in East Hunsbury, Mr. Mayor, that we've actually got people now taking matters into their own hands. We've actually got people cutting down trees, as Councillor Roberts probably noticed on Rotary Road, residents cutting down trees, which shouldn't really be the case. Admittedly, they're right up against the fence, but yeah, that shouldn't be happening. We've really got to take this seriously. And as I say, maintenance, Mr. Mayor, is a big issue. If you look, you remember we planted 800 trees to celebrate the 800th anniversary of Northampton. Charter Wood down at Delapree. Unfortunately, that hasn't been maintained, Mr. Mayor. When you plant trees of that in that density, I think you have to manage them to ensure that the strong specimens survive and reach their full potential. That certainly hasn't happened down there. There's trees amongst them that are dying off that are, you know, really need to come out so those that are there can flourish. And, you know, we need proper management, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, let's get it done. Fully supportive of highways, trees, the right place, the right tree in the right place. But don't forget the problem ones, and let's manage the trees we've got. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Julie Davenport is now indicating to speak.
Julie Davenport.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hello.
Hi. I really want to say how proud I am to be a ward councillor in Delapree and Briar Hill, because we have amazing residents like Alice. I remember in the beginning, Alice approaching me, and she'd have stalls on her street to raise money with cakes and cups of tea and everyone coming together. And speaking at the county council a couple of times, and came to the borough council and just wouldn't give up. And there was that tenacity. And also the fact that Councillor Hallam really took this and ran with it, especially for the benefits of the environment. So I just wanted to say that I'm just so impressed with what Save Our Street Trees are doing. And I think it's a really good example to other community spirited people to do something like Alice has done, because she's really made a difference. And not only in Penryn, we've had new trees on Gloucester Avenue and in Delamere Road. So thank you to Alice, and also obviously to everyone that's helped her. I will support it, obviously.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll call on Councillor Robert, who has the right to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm feeling a little bit concerned because everything's going quite so well this evening. But I meant what I said when I said I was really proud to bring this motion as well. I really want to just focus on some comments that Councillor Larratt made and Councillor Flavel made at the beginning around planting trees and where we plant them. And part of Alice's work and part of the Woodland Trust work and part of this motion's work is to say, let's do this properly. Let's go get the right trees. Let's put the right trees in the right place. Let's talk to the right people. Let's get the experts in, and let's have a proper policy in place. The reason we've got trees up against the side of houses is because we didn't have the right policy in place, and we just went around and did it without thought. I'm not blaming anybody. You know, it's not about that. This is about saying, okay, we know we've got it wrong. We get it right, and we get it right with a really good in-depth policy, one that celebrates our trees, one that sets out clearly what people can and can't do to trees, and doesn't just say they're a nuisance, but confirms all of the health and well-being opportunities that they offer. I think we've got a real opportunity here to make a significant difference, and I'm really pleased again to hear that everybody will be supporting it. I think with Councillor Hibbert's commentary around the potential changes to the NPH-NBC tenancy agreement around tree protection, this policy and the continued work of the fantastic community groups, and we've got a real opportunity to make a massive difference here. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think we're going to get unanimous support. So I am really, really pleased this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I'll put this to the vote.
Mr. Mayor, Ed will launch the poll.
Thank you, Tracy.
Mr. Mayor, 36 councillors for, 1 councillor against, and 1 councillor abstained.
Thank you. Motion 3. Amendment has been submitted by Councillor Golby, Councillor Brian Markham, do you expect the amendment as altered?
I've some problems with the amendment, Mr. Mayor. The part of the amendment that refers to the current situation with the county council and the improvement in services of the county council, I've no no problem with that. In fact, I welcome it. The part of the amendment where they're sort of deleting phrases from there, saying where reference to the 100 days, that was clearly stated by the Prime Minister at this time last year, or the election campaign, clearly mentioned 100 days. He clearly said that he had a policy to which he was going to take control of the adult social. But perhaps I'll accept, Mr. Mayor, that perhaps I'm a little bit naive. When a Prime Minister says they're going to do something, perhaps he didn't actually promise it. So maybe I will accept their amendment scheme. Perhaps I worded it wrongly. There was clear commitment to do things. They've not been done, but perhaps I've misphrased it. So I'll accept the amendment in the spirit of looking for compromise and so I'll accept the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. A copy of the altered motion has been sent to councillors. I now call on Brian Markham to propose a motion as altered.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure you remember earlier this year, in fact, when probably the first engagement you had as mayor, you led us and both the people in the town out on the street. We were all clapping in support of, at that time, the NHS workers, the NHS itself, indeed, and the great job they were doing. As time went by, Mr. Mayor, and lockdown continued, it became clear that not only were we supporting the NHS workers, we were supporting those people in giving care in the community. Those the manager of a care home who was locked in her job, staying in there, protect her residents there. The care workers who were going into people's homes, helping them out, dressing them, whatever. The charities that were delivering food to people who were locked down at home. The parents, and in some cases, children who were looking after members of their family, some of them with severe health problems, with severe disabilities, who the parents and as I say, children of people in need, who found that they no longer had the support of a day centre to go to. They were in lockdown. They couldn't even get food. So suddenly, Mr. Mayor, care and social care became something many people talked about and were concerned about. And yet, Mr. Mayor, it's not something new. The situation regarding having to look after an increasing number of older people in our community has been staring us in the face for many years. The situation of every winter, we've had bed blocking, we've had situations in hospital where the people cannot get a bed because people cannot leave hospital to find care in the community. The situation where councils are finding at the end of this time of the year, coming up to Christmas, suddenly they're having to readjust their budgets because they have a demand for social care that they haven't budgeted for, but of course they have no control over that demand. There's no way they can control. They have to meet the demand, but that affects other services which of course people want and expect and enjoy. Now, I wouldn't say the situation with social care led to the demise of the county council and the financial chaos that was there. But there's no doubt about it, over the years, what's happened with the county council and the difficulties it had funding and providing social care for adult social care in particular, but Chairman's view, led to problems. It led to no end of different reorganisations, outsourcing, arm's length arrangements, all selling off homes, then finding that those homes, they had to take them back in-house or what. All this has been a clear problem for years. And yet we've all known that, as I said before, we have an ageing population and we have more people who live with problems that years ago they wouldn't have survived with. But those people need that care and deserve our care. And
sum up, Brian, time.
Right, okay, sorry. So what this motion is recognising, I hope, Mr. Mayor, that we need to move on. When we move out of this pandemic, we cannot go back to where we were previously. I'm sorry, I've run out of time, I guess, but we need to move on. When we move out of the pandemic, let's move on. Let's all work together in Parliament, in local government, in the industry, in the caring sector to achieve something much better. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Brian. Sally Bearsworth to second the motion as altered.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I'd like to second the motion, and in doing so, I'd like to say that I can certainly remember when the Prime Minister said, whether he promised or not, that there would be reform for adult care, social care, and that a green paper for the future of care would be produced within 100 days of a Conservative victory. Now, I can remember that, but I also remember the 350 million on the side of the bus, and we all know how much truth was in that. So, this pandemic has shown what a terrible crisis we have in adult care and health. And I have to declare an interest, and I'm sure a lot of you there tonight will declare an interest, because we're all aging and a lot of us are old. And we don't know how much longer we've got. And with this COVID, you never know what's going to happen around the corner. But even so, we want to be looked after properly. We don't want to be left in a corridor in hospital on a trolley for hours while we die slowly. I think this is an awful thing. I was listening to Jeremy Hunt, the ex-Secretary for Health, and he was saying that he asked for this to be done when he was in power. He actually took on adult care and health. And I've got funny pictures on my screen at the moment. I've got James Hill for some reason. But anyway, it's a very serious situation. We have to do something. The government did say that it would look into this. It's got to be resolved by the time we come out of the pandemic. People aren't getting younger, they're getting older. I know we're losing a lot of old people at the moment, but there's still an awful lot left of the country that we need to look after. And this, to me, is a way forward. I hope you will support it. I hope the government will work with your MPs and suggest that something ought to be done quickly to make sure that something is in place after the pandemic, that for adult care will be out there, looked after for anybody who needs it. And we all might need it ourselves one day. So please support the motion.
Thank you, Sally.
Councillor Matt Golby is indicating to speak.
Yeah. Councillor Golby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for Councillor Markham in accepting my amendment. And I honestly did put that amendment in the spirit of cooperation. And whilst I'm not here to speak for the Prime Minister, it's very, very clear to me that that there needs to be a fundamental review of adult social care, and I've been saying that for quite a long time, and I know MPs up and down the country have. And of course, you reference the LGA and their work that they've been working on at a cross-party level. So there needs to be a fundamental reform of the way we sort of deliver and look after our ageing population. As Councillor Beardsworth said, you know, Northampton, you know, we're predominantly, of course, we're all growing old, but we've got some very, you know, the communities, the elder communities within the communities that we all represent. Certainly in my area of Duston, it's predominantly an ageing population. So we've got to do something about how we look after people. And Councillor Markham mentioned the carers and the brilliant work they do. And I think the role they play is certainly undervalued. And it's not until we go through something like the pandemic, we had the clapping for the NHS workers. And I think there was a point put quite early on that we need to make sure we encompass all the people that look after our elderly. That's really, really important. But I also wanted to take the opportunity of mentioning, as I did at point 3 of the amendment, some of the work that's been happening at Northamptonshire County Council. Again, I'm speaking about it again this evening, and I don't often talk about the county council stuff at the borough council, but I have to say the service, the directorate under Anna Earnshaw, who is going to be the chief exec of the West Authority, she's made brilliant progress in making the service one of the highest performing, a high performing service in a very efficient way, at a low cost way. And that's been done by concentrating on outcomes. And the county council in the past has perhaps got hung up on demand services like children's services and adult social care, and they've been always talked about as demand in terms of getting people through the front door and trying to deal with it. But if you
time up, Councillor Golby.
Okay. If you look at it in a transformational way, there's much more opportunities to work and integrate with health and health partners. But the bottom line is, I totally support the call to fundamentally reform how we look after our elderly, and I hope everybody else does.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more speakers, Tracy?
Nobody else is indicating, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I'll call on Councillor Brian Markham as the mover to exercise his right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope this means that there'll be unanimous support. But just refer to Councillor Golby. Yes, I recognise the work that's been done on the county council too, but I also recognise that other pressures will come to the new unitary authority, and yeah. It's always going to be, there's going to be pressure on local authority. I personally don't think it's a local authority function necessarily to be looking after all these people, the elderly, is the health. But I'm not suggesting I've got the right answer. What we're suggesting is we support all the work that's going on with the LGA, with the care sector itself, with the health service as well, combination, with ministers and with members of all party groups. That's what that there is a long-term non-political solution. We accept that children go to school. We accept that older people get older and they need care, and other people need care as well. It should be non-political, but it should be affordable, and it should be long-term without interference. And that's what people are asking for. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I now put it to the vote.
The polling will be displayed in just a moment. Mr. Mayor, 33 councillors voted for, none against, and 2 councillors abstained.
Thank you. Item 4, I now call on Councillor Nunn to propose a motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Delighted to do this. I think we've never been more acutely aware of the impact of mental health than we are at the moment. We live in a lockdown where it was bearable in the sunshine of May. The nights are drawing in. People are having huge anxieties around jobs and so many other things, as has already been outlined. And so this is an opportunity to reflect. We reformed the Health and Wellbeing Forum for Northampton a little while ago, delighted to have won some money to support the Action for Happiness Wellbeing campaign. And this just causes us to reflect and commit to a series of ongoing activities, all of which are aiming to recognise the importance of mental health. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Eldred to second the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to second this motion this evening and to obviously throw my support behind it as well, and all the great work that all the charities and community groups are doing around the borough of Northampton, especially during the mental health and wellbeing sector. Again, we're putting a lot of emphasis on this, and we're supporting a lot of the groups around the borough. And thanks to the extra money we put through the COVID, a lot of the councillors have donated a lot of money to the mental health charities around the town, and particularly the one I've been trying to help out lately is the Frank Brunner Foundation. So the councillors that have contributed to that, I thank you personally from that, and thank you on behalf of the Frank Brunner Foundation. But it's a great effort from everybody, and long this may reign, and we keep supporting each other to make sure the mental health and wellbeing is top of our list, to make sure we keep an eye on it, especially under this current climate.
Thank you, Councillor. Speakers, Tracy?
Nobody's indicating, Mr. Mayor.
I call on Councillor Nunn for right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a long evening, so perhaps that draws it to a conclusion. In anticipation of support, may I express my gratitude and thank everybody for recognising the importance of this key aspect to everybody in Northampton at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Vote needed.
Polling will be displayed shortly.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, 34 councillors voted for, none against, and none have abstained.
Thank you. No matters of urgency. I've got two comments tonight. I shall be as brief as possible. We need special thanks to Tracy and Ed for the hard work they do in the background, which really helps everything go as easy as possible. I'm sure we'll wish the speedy recovery of Councillor Meredith. I expected him to be in the chamber tonight from his hospital bed. There's no holding Councillor Meredith down. Best wishes, Councillor Meredith, for your recovery. I close the meeting. Thank